Okay, so we're back and we're going to talk about the New Deal a little bit more. We're going to talk about, this is our second video on the New Deal, and I dug this a whiteboard, so we're going to try this again. Okay, so we're continuing our conversation on FDR and the New Deal. Right, and again, this was just his political plan, the kind of the whole series of acts, the whole series of acts that went under this New Deal. Now, I want to make sure that you understand this kind of, there's different parts or different phases of the New Deal. There's one that's called, kind of talked about or referred to as the first 100 days. And it's basically all the acts and things that are done in the first 100 days of his presidency. So from March of 1933, when he's inaugurated, March 4th, through about 100 days or so. And more is done in those 100 days of his presidency, those first 100 days, than any other president ever. Sometimes more than presidents are able to do in an entire 4 years of their administration. So quite often, and watch for this when you hear this from now on, about the 3-month mark or 3.5 month mark after a new president has been in office, you'll see all the news outlets and commentators and things saying, okay, it's been the first 100 days. How has this president done? And that all starts with FDR, because in his first 100 days, he does more than anyone else has ever done before or since. And of course, it's because we're in this great state of emergency. Those first 100 days have a different feel to it than the next phase of it. And really, the focus of the first 100 days is relief and recovery. This idea of kind of a stop the bleeding kind of reality when it comes to what's going on. People are hungry. People are have no money. People have no shelter. They're living in those Hoovervilles and those shanty towns. Banks are closing by the thousands. People are losing everything by the millions of dollars. It's just a real emergency. And then that second phase that we talk about, the New Deal, and we're going to talk about both, is simply called the Second New Deal. And this is essentially all the legislation that's going to come after those first 100 days, after that first New Deal. So this is really, different periods of time and different purposes. And the purpose of the Second New Deal is really reform, right? This idea of what can we put into place so this never happens again? So we never have this kind of a depression, so we never have these kinds of troubles. So in that Second New Deal, you'll see a lot more permanent changes to the economy, permanent changes to the laws governing the economy, permanent safety nets like Social Security being put into place. So they really are two very different things. So I want to focus first on that first 100 days. So I'm going to erase that Second New Deal, but know that we're going to talk about both. We're going to talk about that first 100 days. So we've already talked about the first act is that Emergency Banking Act, right? That Emergency Banking Act is part of that first 100 days. It's really the first day that Franklin Roosevelt is president, that he, swept a whole Democratic Congress in with him, and they pass it in, less than an hour for the whole process. 10 minutes it passes the House, and again they close the banks and reassure people. So that act is to address that sick industry. The banking industry was not doing well. So that was one of those sick industries. So let's address that, right? They have another act in this first 100 days, very quickly passed by May, and it deals with farming relief. It's the Agricultural Adjustment agency, right? The Agricultural Adjustment Act that creates the Agricultural Adjustment Agency. And this is to help the farmers. We talked about the farmers were having all this trouble, this very sick industry, and this idea of giving the farmers subsidies. This is where subsidies for farmers start. Giving the farmers subsidies to not grow things, right? The idea of we have overproduction, stop growing things, right? Here, if you don't grow things on half of your field here, then there will be less of it made and we'll be able to do less of it. I think, right, if you think about a farmer's field, right, you've got this farmer's field. Let's see how fancy I can be here, right? And if you divide it into 4 sections, whew, look how fancy I am, right? You've got this farmer's field and you're going to divide it into 4 sections. What these subsidies did was they told the farmers not to grow on one of those fields, right? Okay, you've got your fields, you're going to not grow on one of them. We're going to subsidize you. We're going to pay you as a government to not grow on one of your fields, just grow on these 3. And then, next season, you're going to not grow on this one, right? You're going to rotate your crops. And the idea of this is to lower the supply, the demand will stay steady, prices will go up, it'll help. It'll also help with the Dust Bowl problems, right? It's really a pretty good idea. The problem with this, and there is some advantage, right? The gross income of farmers goes up, by half in the first 3 years of the New Deal. So this is really good. But think back to our conversations about those sharecroppers. And there are so many people who are farming this land, tenant farmers and sharecroppers who don't own the land, that these checks from the AAA, right, the Agricultural Adjustment Agency, the checks from the AAA are going to go to the landowners, not to the people farming the land. So if you've got tenant farmers or sharecroppers on each of these 4 fields, and then all of a sudden the landowner gets money to say, okay, well, don't grow on one of your fields. The landowner is going to tell the tenant farmer or the sharecropper, hey, we're not going to grow on your field this year. Good luck. Move on down the road. So the people who need the money the most, the very poorest of the poor in this case, aren't going to get the help that they need. They're just not, because the money is going to go to the landowners instead of the farmers. So this is a real weakness of this. There are other laws that are going to come along associated to that. I actually teach a class called Between the Wars. It's a upper level class for history majors, and it's the 1920s and 1930s, and we go into a lot more of these acts and things like that. But I just wanted to, I'll keep it simple for now. So hopefully this makes sense to you. I'm going to see how fancy I can be erasing it. Oh, that's so cool. All right. So another piece of this New Deal legislation in those first 100 days to help business is the National Industrial Recovery Act. And the idea of this NIRA, right, it all went by its letters there, is to work on peer pressure to get businesses to not lay people off, to, if you retain your workforce, if you don't fire people or lay people off, then you get to have this blue eagle and you get to put that in your window and put that on your product. And then people will buy your product instead of somebody's product without the blue eagle. And then, that peer pressure works and the economy recovers. It doesn't really work. And it later gets overturned by the Supreme Court, but that's a whole nother part of the story. So you've got this effort to help banks, you've got this effort to help farmers, you've got this effort to help businesses. And then the most important piece of this first 100 days of the New Deal is going to be public relief, right? Public relief, because you've got all these people that are hungry, people that are suffering. And so I'm going to separate this a little bit if I can. Right. So these are the different industries. So public relief, and the agency or the law that is passed and creates this agency is the Federal Emergency Relief Agency. Right, the FERA, Federal Emergency Relief Agency. And you know, if you go on and you study the New Deal anymore or read more about it, it's all going to be, come on, we're just going to leave it like that. It's all going to be acronyms, right? The AAA, the NIRA, the FERA, all of these things. But the idea of this was the Federal Emergency Relief Agency was run by a man named Harry Hopkins. And he was an old social worker, you know, had been poor much of his life, but gained FDR's attention and was brought in to lead this agency. He was very frank and honest with Roosevelt and said, you know, we got all these problems. And Eleanor Roosevelt was a huge part of this, helping Franklin Roosevelt see these problems and find the right people to lead these programs. And Harry Hopkins said, when he's talking about the FERA and the work that they're going to do, he said, look, he said, hunger is not debatable. Hunger is not debatable. This isn't something that you can sit around and talk about and debate about like politicians normally do. People are hungry. People are hungry now. You can't say, hey, don't eat for the next couple of weeks while we work out the politics. You have to feed people. And this is the United States of America. Even in the middle of the Depression, we were one of the wealthiest nations in the world. How is it possible that we could have hungry people on our streets? It just doesn't make any sense. And it's just negligence if we don't do something about it. And Harry Hopkins was very adamant about this idea that, you know, you've got to feed people. So this Federal Emergency Relief Agency was about that. It was about immediately taking care of those basic human needs. He went in and got, you know, K rations, the Army's old K rations that were left over from World War I and from training, and fed people. He went in and took empty buildings, especially government buildings, and let people live in them, right? Let the homeless live in them. He gave people clothing, including old military clothing, old surplus Army clothes. You know, you feed people, you clothe people, you give people shelter, those very basic human needs that were not being met. And Harry Hopkins and you know, Franklin Roosevelt, as part of this New Deal, said, no, this is the United States of America. You don't let people be homeless and hungry. And so they stepped in with this, you know, idea of let's stop that bleeding of people being hungry. We can talk about politics later. Let's feed people and give them a safe, warm place to sleep. And that was an incredibly important thing and a big step, because in the United States we'd never had that. We'd never had that safety net before, and they just said, you know, that's not acceptable. That's not acceptable. Okay, so connected other pieces of this first 100 days that I'm not going to go into too much detail about. The Civil Works Administration, or the CWA, right? The Civil Works Administration created jobs so that people could work for their money. So one of the things about this New Deal was it continued with this observation that people want to work, people want to earn their money. People, you know, sure, it's nice to have, you know, somebody slip you $20, say, go spend it, have fun. But it doesn't feel as good as when you earn $20 and then you go and you spend it, right? When it's yours and you deserved it and you earned it. And that was the philosophy of the time, is, you know, let's create jobs for people, not just give people money. They didn't want people to be on what they called the dole, right? You know, just here, take this money. They wanted people to earn it. And we see this same attitude reflected in American society today, right? The Relief Act that CARE Relief Act during the pandemic, and this idea of just giving people money. Well, there's got to be a balance there, is the argument. You can't just give people money, but you also can't have people starve or get evicted from their houses. So, in times of crisis. So how do you find that balance? So the Civil Works Administration created jobs so people could work for their money. And a related organization, let's see if I can move this up. A related organization is the Civilian Conservation Corps, right? Or the CCC, right? Because you've got a lot of young people, especially young men that are out of work and out of school, out of work. And the idea is to bring in young people, again, some women, but mainly men, to work for the National Park Service, which was fairly new, but coming out of the progressive era, to plant trees, to build new parks. You can still find parks across the United States, across Texas, that have little CCC signs. And this is where this Civilian Conservation Corps has come in and built these parks. The thing about the CCC is that because it's young people, a percentage of their checks had to be sent home every week. So the idea of it was, you're getting all these young people off the streets, you're doing something good for the future by building these parks, and you're also helping supplement the incomes of their families back home. So it was a bigger idea, but there's a lot of young people that went through this program that say it saved their lives. They were just on the streets, or they were, riding the trains, hoping to find jobs and that kind of thing. But this is about where I want to go with those first 100 days. The big picture of the first 100 days of FDR and the New Deal is relief and recovery. They want to provide emergency relief. This is all emergency. None of this was meant to be permanent, right? Some of the parks obviously will be permanent, but these jobs, this Federal Emergency Relief Agency, none of these are meant to be permanent things. They're meant to be temporary, to just kind of stop the bleeding of the depression and to give people a safe place to sleep. As the emergency lightens a little bit, as that bleeding is stopped, we'll move into that second phase, that second New Deal, which will have more permanent and long-term changes towards reform. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. All right, so stick with me. You're learning a lot of good stuff.